at pre-halving years, right? So like 2015 and 2019, you'll notice that I'm not going to go through and count them, but you'll notice that in 2015 and 2019, about half the months are green and half the months are red, right? In your bear market years, like your 2014, your 2018, and your 2022, you have about 8 or 9 of those months are red, right? So it's more obviously a bear market. You have 2014, 2018, 2022, obviously a bear market. 2015, 2019, and 2023, which are about half green and half red. And it's interesting because, 2019, 5 of the first 6 months of the year were green, right? So the only month that was green or red in 2019 in the first half of the year was January. And so far in 2023, 5 of the first 6 months of the year have been green. But in the back half of 2019, 5 of the last 6 months were red.
While Bitcoin looks promising and is pumping to over 30,000 in 2023, there are obvious signs that the altcoin market is getting wrecked soon. Charts don't lie. Big money is moving from altcoins to Bitcoin again. Just check this out.
Yeah, I think the dominance just kind of reiterates how the SEC is going after so many of the alts and calling them securities. And it's basically a combination of people being very hesitant to put money into the Cardanos, the Matics, those kind of things, and saying, okay, well, which one's the safe one where the SEC's basically said it's not a security, that's Bitcoin. Then you throw into the mix that kind of the news from BlackRock over the last week where they're like, hey, we're going to file for a spotted ETF. And we have actually seen multiple other big Wall Street financial institutions filing for these Bitcoin ETFs. So it does seem like everyone that's giving confidence to people being in Bitcoin. And that dominance reflects that, I think.
The fundamentals of various altcoin projects don't really matter so much if we're just in the phase where Bitcoin sucks in all that liquidity back up. And it really does seem like we're in that phase. And, one thing I thought, and we were talking about this earlier too, about the dominance is I think a lot of people are sort of used to the idea of low Bitcoin dominance because they joined crypto kind of after Bitcoin had its parabolic rally in late 2020, early 2021. But the thing that I can't, get past is if we can go from 60% to 48% in 4 weeks, why can't we go from 48% to 60% in a very similar time period? And I think that sort of goes back to what we were talking about as to getting that move up to that 60% level. One thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about with you is, I know that we can talk about the lower highs with Bitcoin dominance, and this is what everyone talks about, right? Like everyone is a huge believer in the lower highs by Bitcoin dominance from one cycle to another. And it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, it was like 95% and then we hit, 73%. And so the idea, of course, is, well, maybe it'll only go to 60%. But there's this one thing that kind of keeps bugging me. And it's the fact that we also have higher lows,
Yeah.
And I think this is something that I don't think should go overlooked. This low here in 2018 was at 35, but this low in 2022 was at 38. And so I'm still curious, what's the more important trend here? Is it the lower highs, or is it the higher lows? Or another way to look at it, I'm curious what you think as well, is this sort of just the initial, capitalization of the altcoin market? And then do you basically just have an oscillator where it kind of goes between these two ranges back and forth? I'm curious as to what you think about that.
What we have here in technical analysis is called a wedge pattern, which is higher lows and lower highs. And so it creates, and you can see I have a couple of the other lines. This was the breakout line we discussed, where it was clearly breaking out once it got through that like 49% level. And then this is kind of the target zone that you and I agree on, which is that 60, 59%, where you have pivot point, and then that creates that trend line, and then the downsloping one going back to the dominance prior. And I think you made a great point, is that, so many of these investors have come in after 2020 in terms of Bitcoin, so they don't remember a period when Bitcoin dominance was so massive, so dominant, if you will. And I think it's important because people are like, oh, well, the alts will at some point rally back. And that may be the case, but it may be longer than people think. And Bitcoin may be more dominant for a longer period of time. Eventually price. So these two lines will meet at some point in the future, right? A triangle, you have the two lines getting closer and closer. And what that's going to cause is it's either going to cause a breakdown or a breakout. In this case, I would not be surprised to see a breakout in this scenario. Granted, it could still be 3-6 months away, but at some point, a wedge pattern like this is very likely to break out to the upside. So 60% will be resistance, but don't discount the possibility that it could eventually break through that and go back to previous levels that we haven't seen for years.
Gareth and Ben are experts in technical analysis and predicting what's happening next through charts. And they are going through the Bitcoin dominance chart, which analyzes the amount of money in Bitcoin against the altcoins, including stablecoins. If you take the stablecoins out of the charts, what's coming even gets more evident.
That if you think about the position that Bitcoin and crypto is in right now, you have the potential for regulation, but Bitcoin and Ethereum, when you bring in institutional money, they're not going to go and be like, oh, let's buy some Pepe, right? I mean, they're going to be focusing, and remember, they have these fiduciary responsibilities for their clients to focus on the best quality, the safest. And so really, you could actually see massive inflows of institutional money come into the space, which BlackRock is almost starting the thought process on, is that that'll actually increase Bitcoin dominance because so much big money could come in, and it's not going to go to the 50th on the market cap list. It just isn't.
Because we talked before about breaking the range high on the dominance, right? This 49% level, and then once it breaks, it should move pretty quickly. Excluding stables, we also broke the range high, right? But we broke it last week, and so now that that's broken, I think there should be plenty of room to move higher.
So if the altcoin market is going down except for Ethereum, what is the prediction for Bitcoin?
Normally, when the dominance rallies, like we saw back over here in 2018 and in 2019, like half of the move is normally accompanied by Bitcoin pump, and then the other half is normally accompanied by Bitcoin dump, right? That's what we've normally seen. So I'm still of the opinion that we likely will have a secondary scare at some point. My sort of base case has been sometime between Q3 and Q1 of 2024 is likely when we would see that. So yeah, I mean, I think you could get a scenario where you get, say, an uninverted yield curve because the Fed's forced to pivot because they broke something, and then that's when we figure out, is it a higher low, is it a double bottom, or is it a lower low? And I mean, I think it's too early to know for sure. Last cycle, we were basically at 3,100, and we didn't even come close to testing that until 14 months later. For reference, for this cycle, that would get you out to February of 2024 if it took the same amount of time to sort of figure out that idea. And then the prior cycle, we figured we got the double bottom in August, right? So you can see that Bitcoin actually went up, and it found its high, its early Q3 high, and then collapsed into August, and then in 2019 it found its high in late June. So I mean, I do, my base case is that we in the pre-halving years, actually I have a chart for this if you want to, or a table that we can look at. So like if you look at pre-halving years, right? So like 2015 and 2019, you'll notice that I'm not going to go through and count them, but you'll notice that in 2015 and 2019, about half the months are green and half the months are red, right? In your bear market years, like your 2014, your 2018, and your 2022, you have about 8 or 9 of those months are red, right? So it's more obviously a bear market. You have 2014, 2018, 2022, obviously a bear market. 2015, 2019, and 2023, which are about half green and half red. And it's interesting because 2019, 5 of the first 6 months of the year were green, right? So the only month that was green or red in 2019 in the first half of the year was January. And so far in 2023, 5 of the first 6 months of the year have been green. But in the back half of 2019, 5 of the last 6 months were red. And you'll see some similar types of things in 2015 as well. So I think the pre-halving year is more or less a time to sort of wash out both the bulls and the bears, right? So you get, I just say, like, get both sides sufficiently wrecked. Then we get our final scare, and then we typically go up into a bull market.
When I talk to, right now there are so many bulls. For me being like a pseudo bear, thinking that maybe we haven't put it a low, the amount of like hate on Twitter is like at a contrarian level, where it's like everyone is just like, okay, we're gonna buy Bitcoin because even if it goes down, it's okay because the halving next year will make us rich, right? And I'm like, okay, I've traded for years and I thought that way, and every time I thought that way, it didn't happen, and so it just like has me on edge, and I'm like, wait, it's never that easy.
Right? Yeah. No, it's funny because I mean I remember so in 2015 I was not very optimistic because I mean we basically in 2015 if you remember like Bitcoin we sort of crashed in August, and I mean this is when the chart looks like this, so it's not obvious that it's not just going to come collapsing back down, you know. And I wasn't very optimistic. Last cycle I was pretty optimistic, even going into the halving. Like I was pretty optimistic that we would go into a bull run, but I also remind myself that, you know, there is this element of like, I was right about that, but it could have been I was right because the Fed printed $6 trillion, right? Like, you know, like what happens if the Fed doesn't do that, you know? And again, like when the Fed prints that much money, you're going to have the riskiest assets go up, right? Because when there's more of that excess liquidity, it's those assets that'll go up. I think in general though, look, there could be a future bull run where Bitcoin runs and altcoins don't run as much because you know, there's just not as much excess liquidity as there has been in prior cycles. So right. Yeah, I mean, like I still would be on the side of it will likely trend back up in say like that 2025 timeframe, but I want to be open-minded to the idea. Well, if the labor market doesn't soften between now and the halving, then that is going to be sort of something we have to be cautious about in the next after the next halving.
But there are way more signs of what's happening and what's coming next. Check out the full interview here and please leave a like and subscribe.